Well, good morning, everyone. And glad to see we got some morning folks joining us, and it's going to be a good chat. I think we definitely we had another panelist that is maybe might join, but you have us three here, and it's we'll be going through a few kind of stock questions. Definitely encourage asking questions. We'll run through as many as we possibly can, time allotted. But for me, my name's Brett. I'm a senior manager of talent at Indigo Agriculture here in Boston, well, Charlestown. Before that, I was a talent consultant at a bunch of different companies. Helped really early stage companies, either after seed funding or post Series A, and growth of just hiring technical folks. We also have with us Megan, if you want to run through a quick intro of who you are.
Sure. Hey, everybody. It's nice to meet you, and I'm thrilled to be on the panel. My name is Megan Lockwood. I'm right now the Vice President of Strategic Marketing at a company called Ikorio, which is a consultancy, high growth in Boston, where we've been the #1 company to work for in Boston for the last 3 years in a row in our category. And prior to that, I was actually a financial analyst early in my career. So it's sort of, Juliet just said earlier that she had a non-traditional path to marketing. I did too. And then after that, I went into, I was an analyst studying sort of conversion rate optimization and the psychology of why people said yes online. I went to HubSpot to do that, and then was I've been at Ikorio for 5 years, but prior to that, I was the director of consumer marketing for the Boston Globe for about a year. So thrilled to be here.
Awesome. And Juliet.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. My name is Juliet Kopecki. I am the Chief Marketing Officer over at Link Squares. We're a startup in the Boston area, about 70 employees. And I've worked at a number of really high growth, fast-paced startups, leading marketing, but I also have a background. I've worked on product teams, I've worked in sales, and like Megan mentioned, I also worked in finance, so kind of funny similarity there. But and we both work together at HubSpot. So it's kind of exciting to have a little mini reunion as well.
Awesome. So we can definitely, let's get into just some quick topics up front that Megan and Juliet can definitely touch on in terms of marketing and culture and the relationship there. But we could probably start with Megan, all right? And your experience just specifically with Ikorio, right? And what you guys have gone through recently. You kind of share that with the group, and then talk about that change in culture as it kind of goes, and the relationship with marketing to that.
Yeah, definitely. So Ikorio's been on kind of an interesting journey, and I have been at earlier stage startups, but I actually joined Ikorio at about employee 46, 47, and we're now just under 250 employees. So it's been interesting to watch our culture change at every single stage of that growth. And then just recently, about 2 weeks ago, we announced the intent to acquire. So we announced on signing day, but we're gonna it's a consulting firm. So we do strategic advisory consulting, and we're going to be acquired by one of the largest IT consulting companies across the globe, named NTT Data Services. So kind of exciting, been very interesting along the way. And I will say that, especially because we're a consultancy, so our product is our people, culture was always very, very intentional. I did not come in. So I came in, we already had a chief people officer and we had a relatively well-defined culture, but I think that we've created sort of inflection points along the way, because at a certain point, about 100 people, you can't really have oral history anymore. And so we really defined a specific culture code and then culture strategy. And that is something that we continuously sort of put forth to our customers and to our prospects. It's part of our public face, is our culture.
That's awesome. And that's being able to partner with a CPO. Actually, we might pause and rewind a little bit to do an intro. David, thanks for joining.
Hey, sorry about the technical difficulties.
No worries. So we're kind of just getting into things, but we'll rewind a little bit. So for folks that don't know who you are, can you give the group and everyone paint it there here at home?
Just jump right in.
Fire away. Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, my name is David Vork. I work on Skynet, which is a decentralized web platform for building applications such as, say, a decentralized Dropbox or a decentralized file sharing or decentralized blogging. So I've been working on it for about 6 years. I'm the CEO of a company which will be renaming itself to Skynet Labs, and we're about 10 people. So yeah.
Awesome. Love the name. Can't wait for that rebranding. Okay. So I think this would might be a good question for you and Juliet. I might kind of jump into this too, especially as a founder, right? And Megan, you touched on too about being intentional about culture. So David, as a founder, being intentional about culture, what does that look like in the early days? And Juliet, I'm leaning on you afterwards too, because you've worked with multiple startups before, and you've definitely been involved in that process before, so you guys can kind of have a good perspective on both sides of that, from marketing and as a founder.
Yeah, so I think in the early days, culture is actually a lot easier because myself and Luke, we're both very passionate and principled people. And when you're like, say, 3, 4, 5 people, that just is kind of, you interact with every employee every single day. And sometimes, it's several hours every day. And so your vision, your goals, the way you want the business to act, and the foundation you want to build for your business, it just rolls over everybody, and so everybody gets to kind of embrace it. And I think that that makes those first, say 5 employees a lot more important, because they're the ones who got the most authentic exposure to the founders and to the foundation of the business. And then I've kind of found that as we grow, as we've gotten to 10 plus people, it becomes a lot harder for the founders to spend as much time with the employees. And so that's where I think the intentionality starts to become a lot more significant, is that you want to set up, principles for the business, ways that employees act. And I think that almost sort of like a mythos for the company. And one of the things that I find really inspiring is the post office has this mythos of, we always deliver mail, rain, snow, storms. We're out there delivering mail. And I think this is something that defines in a big way the culture of employees at the post office 200 years later. And so when we're running Nebulous, that's the sort of thing that I look to for building a culture.
Awesome. And Julia, as in the early stages of a startup, right? And taking that culture and seeing what it looks like, how can marketing kind of provide that support, and from a talent brand perspective too, of showcasing that culture of what it is?
Yeah, I think similar to what kind of David outlined there, is that in the early days, culture, a lot of it I think comes from the CEO. And if you think about, those first, let's say 5, 10 employees, the CEO is obviously very involved with the hiring and finding the right people that will build the company culture and the company that's kind of within that vision and the brand. And as you get larger and larger, it's more important to kind of solidify it, to make sure that you're communicating it across the company. Because now when I think about the stage that LinkSquares is at, we're 70 employees, where it's not as if the CEO or the co-founder at my company is involved in every single hire we make. So you need to make sure that hiring team for new employees, that your company culture, the things that are important, the qualities that you look for in the people, is being communicated across the company. And how does that sort of trickle down into questions that you ask during an interview, things that you screen for, qualities that you look for, and also qualities that you don't look for. What are the things that kind of break down the culture of the organization, or that are things that are kind of, for lack of a better word, unacceptable within the organization? And how do you make sure that that you're continuing to build the right culture in a thoughtful way? I think also in particular for startups, if I look at the stats for the company that I'm at, or companies that I've worked in previously, you think about the funnel for people that want to join startups, where, let's be honest, for startups in Boston that are 70 employees that have raised a Series A, which is where LinkSquares is at right now, there's a lot of companies that are at that stage. There's a lot of potential opportunities and places that people can join that kind of check all those boxes. So the thing that differentiates us is our culture and the people within the company, and being really mindful and strategic about that, thinking through it, making sure that those are things that we're communicating, that we're actively hiring for, are really what's going to set us apart and enable us to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And Megan, so you talked earlier on in kind of the intro about how you were, in the early, or with the Choreo when, it was double digits, and now it's grown significantly. So can you touch on kind of that, the changing, culture change? Because culture is not meant to be static by any means ever. All right.
Yeah.
And as a company grows and as, a culture changes and shifts with that, how is that something on marketing's mind, right, as it grows? And how can you kind of showcase that to the world, that it's changing and it's not meant to be the same?
Yeah, well, and I think that what we did is we sat down every 6 or 8 months, because even as you grow, right, when you're growing 40 or 50%, and we had a couple of years where our employees were doubling every single year too. So you go from 45 to 100 to 200. And I think that what you hire in the clients that you get are a little different. So we were really intentional, because I think, as Juliet said, that it's also, culture becomes the glue. It's a retention strategy. People like to work for something that is us. So we laid out, it was a 6 sort of ethos culture code, that a choreo is everyone and there is no them, there's only us, that kind of thing. And that we roll easy, because I think we always wanted to make sure that we didn't have a ton of egos, because that wasn't really scalable for our organization, that kind of thing. But, what was interesting is we would sit down with even the talent. We meet weekly, the marketing team and the talent team. And so to talk about what the website looks like, and every 6 or 8 months, again, we sort of think about, okay, has our employer brand changed? What are those words? What does it look like? Because I think that, our brand has been a living thing throughout the course of it. And so the storytelling that we put around the employer brand is another critical piece to hiring, to retention, because we've pushed it public. So we have our culture code on our blog. It's part of, we have an employee spotlight that we do on a monthly basis. And so because we push that public, we get a lot of feedback that that's part of why our customers work with us, because, when we're competing against the KPMGs that are sort of these big monoliths, the difference is who you're sitting down with in a meeting every single day. So that's one of the pieces.
Yeah. Awesome. And for everyone, all the attendees, like we're going to be sending out a poll for people to answer quickly. If we could send that out now, that would be a good talking point afterwards. So it should pop up on your screen right now. And one other thing I kind of wanted to ask David, right, as a founder of a company, right, and you touched on it before about it's, culture is very intentional. And I think Juliet mentioned, I don't know where she went, but it stems from from the founders, right? Culture is sometimes definitely viewed as a reflection of the founders, right? And me as someone in the talent organization of a company, all the time we get asked, what's the culture like? How do you in your company and as a founder, can you be proactive about, sharing your culture to a broader audience, right? If people just don't see that, it's not something they see in the work that you do or the products you put out.
Yeah, I think a big part of it comes down to media presence. And in particular, I know for us and for Skynet and Saya, we actually have a couple of blog posts that have been really salient, shared a lot. And where the passion and the ideology comes through very strongly. And so that's a good way to get exposure to, the types of things we believe, the types of just the ways we spend our energy, and what's important to us. And so I think that having a good communication medium, and then also just making sure that occasionally you touch base and you make this, powerful, emotional article that's kind of defining for the company. So that's kind of how we've been approaching broadcasting our culture in a more public way.
Awesome. And I definitely want to touch on a few questions that have come through. And Megan, I think maybe you can handle this one too, that Kim had sent. And she asked, as you scale and potentially hire international team members, what impact do you anticipate this having on your culture? I'm not sure if you have insight into that. And I know that Korea has grown a bunch. Don't know if you guys have international employees, but also I know ServiceNow is an international company for sure. So.
Yeah, so we have a team in Spain that we expanded into Spain. So to EMEA, and we're looking for the same types of people, and we had and when I mean types of people, because I've seen a couple other things that had the ethos that we punch above our weight, that we're for everyone, that we're open, but also that they roll easy, like that kind of side of it. And so we have been a little bit opportunistic about our growth, and so there was a team in EMEA in Europe that had sort of established ServiceNow skills, experience, and it made sense to grow there. And one of the things we did to make sure that our culture wouldn't change all that much is we actually did almost like an exchange program. So we were growing sort of new technical talent, and we have something called an academy, which is almost like a 6-month kind of apprenticeship program to learn not just the technical skills, but how to be a consultant. And so we've had now 3 groups of 2 at a time academy members that were sort of stellar performers on the academy team that went and lived in Spain for 6 months each at a time, or sorry, not 6 months. I think it was 8 weeks at a time. And so that started even when we just had 10 people in Spain. 2 of them were people that really sort of reflected and embraced our culture. And so that helped be kind of we're hoping it will be bidirectional. With some of the shutdowns, that's not, so like that was the plan for like April. So we're waiting for some of those pieces to happen, but I think it's been very much on purpose to kind of go back and forth. And I will say that that's been a lot of the founder's vision of what to do, and the people that are running the team. I think, we have a really great leadership team that is very thoughtful about that. So but I think that was a smart way to do it. And then from a marketing standpoint, even to show it or share it, we had them kind of live blog and do a video blog and that kind of thing in order to make sure that people saw what we were doing too, on our team and also externally.
Yeah. Similarly, I've had that experience with Indigo, because we've grown extensively we're 7 years old and we have 1,000 employees and have an office in Switzerland, Argentina, and Brazil. And the company, the mission, it definitely shaped the culture through and through, right? Especially as we've grown and as companies grow too. But there's always definitely cultures within each office, within each team, each group, especially as you continue to scale and grow. I've seen it definitely form itself in positive ways from the culture, and that the differences are celebrated, although the company mission is everything's still aligned there, right? And that's definitely something that is intentional when you think about that, and how you keep a culture pretty across an organization that scales, similar, but also can celebrate the change as it continues to grow. And Juliet, what about the experience that you've had in the different companies you've had, different sizes of the, the culture about and marketing and things that have gone well, things that have been challenging? What's that look like in different companies and stages that you've been with?
Yeah, from my own personal experience, I thought it was really interesting what Megan outlined in terms of how they deal with international. I really like a lot of those pieces of the program and sort of that communication, and also like that back and forth. For me, I would say like my most relevant experience has been, so one of the startups that I was a part of, Backupify, during the time I was there, we went through an acquisition. And while it wasn't international specifically, as part of the acquisition, we were basically blending 2 very different company cultures together, kind of in an instant. And some of those same pieces that Megan had outlined, we kind of similarly did like a lot of back and forth between the 2 different locations, kind of, learning from each other, kind of like what works, what doesn't work. I think really what's important there is, having that open mind where you might have the same sort of guiding principles and vision for the company culture, but say like 2 different interpretations. Like growth to one person might be one thing, it might mean something different to another person. And how do you kind of keep an open mind and think through, like, why is someone doing something maybe in a different way that I'm doing it? It can still be the right way, but a different way, and keeping that open mind and being open to new ideas and ways of doing things.
Awesome. All right, so we'll think it's a good time to show the results from those polls, and we'll see what it looks like. And pretty close. So talking about who was hired first, that question, the marketing or talent. So
I'm actually really surprised by this.
I kind of did too, but of course I come from I'm working with like tech, from the tech side of tech recruiting too. So that's my thought, but I'm interested. We can unpack some more. So David, for you as a founder, what was your thought to this question? Who would you hire first, and who did you hire first, or partner with first, right? Marketing or talent?
Yeah. So for us, it felt pretty obvious that we would want to hire marketing first. I think part of it might be just the amount of money and the amount of personnel we were looking. We've never been in a position where we wanted to hire, say, 20 people in the next year. And I guess if you want to count, things like Hired or these more expensive recruiting programs, we have signed up for those, and so they're it's not quite the same as hiring an entire talent person. But I do think that we started spending on recruiting before we started spending on marketing. But ultimately, we got a marketing person first, and I think that comes down to, in big part, just how rapidly we were growing.
Yeah, and Megan, Juliet, you guys have both been in spots or have you guys been in spots where this hasn't been any talent organization?
No, I mean,
No.
most companies, most of my experiences, certainly like being a first marketer at a startup, has been like marketing has come before a talent, like a formal talent person. Like I would love to be in a position right now where we had a talent team. And I suppose like that's part of my thinking through why having that communication and marketing being able to facilitate some of that communication across the organization of what the company values are, what the company culture is, how should hiring be approached. I think that marketing kind of has that skill set for communicating and kind of the messaging and positioning skill set that helps facilitate that conversation. I am currently hiring for my team. Like I would love to be able to partner with like a hiring team to do that. I do a lot of my own recruiting, and it's partially because of like the company culture. When I think about like how important and how valuable our company culture is to us, and also just even with running a small marketing team, when I think about even like the culture of my own marketing team and the types of people that I want to hire and the things that I value in people that I work with, I like having I don't mind, I suppose, having that level of control. It'd be great to have more resources, but I also want to be really careful and mindful of the types of people that I hire and how they're going to contribute and add value.
Yeah, absolutely. And Megan, one more question for you, and I'll jump into some questions that some attendees have been asking and upvoting. So keep asking questions through Slido, everyone, and upvoting. That'll get you at the top of the list for sure. But Megan, you've partnered, or even at Corio now, you partner with talent in the majority of the time, or a good amount of time, right? But let's focusing on the culture piece, because I mean, I know we said for me, whenever I talk to potential hires, I mentioned the question I always get is culture. What does it look like, right? So how do you and your team partner with talent to make sure that you guys are aligned with that?
Well, so, I mean, I think that we've had a really nice working relationship. So we hit, I think it was in the 70 to 100 people range, where all of a sudden, there was a thing that was always our culture, that that we felt like consistent, that we hired for, and that we had competencies behind. But then all of a sudden it was sort of like, we need to codify that in a way that everyone can share in a really simple, well branded, like, we need a culture brand as well. And so we sat down in a room for a couple days and wrote out a culture code that then we decided to share and socialize. And we also have, we have a couple, as we grew, again, about the same time, we created some like culture teams internally that are cross-functional. So it's called The Vibe for us, but it's a group of our technical consultants, some of the kind of evangelizers for early days of the culture, and then and my whole marketing team, to sort of, you know, because we and a lot of the HR, you know, the talent and the recruiting teams too, to sort of package up what people believe we are. The one thing I would say about scale that I was sort of thinking about is, I think it's really important when you look at a culture to embed in it that it is going to change. Because I think as we grew, one of the pieces that different intervals, people would be like, we don't feel like us anymore, you know, but you're not going to. When you're a 40-person company or when you're a 10-person company, you're going to feel like you get access to the CEO and you know everybody, and you should. And there's weirder moments when you don't recognize everybody's name anymore. Like that's a strange thing for people. So to make that living, but also to, as you bring people in, if you're on a growth trajectory, to let people know that we're going to grow, but everybody that comes in is going to make us a little different or a little better, like that kind of thing. I think setting that expectation allows your culture to scale. I don't know if you guys have opinions on that, but that's what we've seen.
It's always funny when I've worked with other companies and like those startup days, when people talk about the startup days, and they're like, they always speak fondly of those early days of those war rooms, and you're scrapping everything out. And then, you know, as you grow, and it's kind of like, you kind of lament on that. And it's like, oh, you know, those days were great. Although I'm glad we got through it and we're not there anymore, but those days were great. But like, that's part of the culture initially, you know, but celebrating that and having that, keeping that as a forward momentum, especially as you scale, is something that's sometimes could be held onto too tightly, or you know, and could kind of falter some growth, or some kind of stop some culture from kind of evolving into something as it changes, or being static, or continue to change as we go. But David, a good question for you that came through is the topic of remote culture, remote work. Right. And maybe I think from building a company, of like, how does remote work affect the culture of a team, of a company, of a group?
Yeah, certainly it impacts the amount of exposure people have to each other. And so we were mostly remote prior to March, and now we're entirely remote. More than half of our team is in Europe, which the founders are in Boston. So, but I think, interestingly enough, our new employees, even the ones that, you know, haven't had much exposure to the founders, still embody the culture, and still embody, you know, the founding principles of the company. And I think that a lot of this just comes down to, I guess, just all the you know, Discord has been a huge enabler for us. I know a lot of people use Slack, and I think, you know, same function. And just constant communication with everybody, checking in, and then when you see things, just highlighting the way you choose to highlight, you know, the output of your community, the output of your users, defines and helps people get in tune with what you care about. So I would just, in general, with the remote question, I feel like as long as you're still active and communicating with everybody, the face-to-face ends up being not as important as I think a lot of people would believe. That that's not to say that there wouldn't be more value to, you know, meeting face to face, but I think we've been able to retain a lot of that value despite losing the on-site.
Which it definitely helps too, of having a remote friendly culture before being forced to be remote. So in this point, right, when there's going to be who knows what a new normal will be, right, of working, and what, you know, how the current state will change remote culture across the entire industry, you know, as a whole. If you were to thinking in this current moment, if you were to start Nebulous now, you know, what are the things that you consider for being remote and continue, or promoting a good remote culture moving forward, and how can you kind of celebrate that and then bring people into that? And to Howard's question, who asked, is it better to have the best talent regardless of location? And there's some contradictory thoughts there, not contradictory thoughts, but differences of opinions on what that actually, if that's true or not.
Yeah, so I think to answer the is it better to have the best talent question, I think it really comes down to what you're building. And I think in a lot of cases, if what you're building is very challenging and unique and it hasn't been done before, then unquestionably, you need to have the right person and you need to have the right people. And it's much better to, go through pains to make sure you get the best person. If you're building something that, it's similar to a lot of other products, there are a lot of people out there, a lot of professionals who have experience in that type of work. I think it's not nearly as important. But still, I think, especially in something as like cutting edge as blockchain, it's the best people are 10 to 100x better than the average people. And so it is absolutely worth bending over backwards to find them. What was the first part of the question?
So my first part of the question is, now as you look at like today, if you were to start an IBS today, would you look for just a fully remote culture, right? Would you look to hire fully remote, or would you want a more like a presence where you could be face to face and in person if there wasn't an office or the ability to be in an office together?
Yeah, no, I think we would be fully remote right off the bat. One thing we've done that I think has been important is we've limited the time zones. So basically, headquarters are in Boston, and you have to be in a time zone such that your working hours overlap at least 25% the Boston working hours. That way, people, I guess the founders, right? We would just say the founders, if we were starting from scratch, definitely get exposure to the employees, and you can have a good chunk of real-time communication. And so face-to-face is not as important as real-time, whether it's Telegram, Discord, or whatever. So I do like that restriction, and I think I would maintain it. But that gives you, I think, 14 time zones to choose from is a pretty broad range. And so I would say that, that's a lot better than requiring everybody to be, say, in Boston or in New York or in San Francisco.
Awesome. All right. A couple awesome questions came through that I absolutely want to touch on. And Julia, I think you can field this one. So how can a company develop a diverse culture when the culture is predominantly white? Or maybe it might be, it says culture white, but I think maybe when the company's maybe better to say is how can a company develop a diverse culture when the company isn't necessarily diverse upfront? Maybe that might be a way to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is like one of these things where it has to be valued across the organization that diversity matters and why it matters. What is the company really looking to add? Is it sort of differences in thought? Is it people from different backgrounds that come from different places? What is really kind of motivating that diversity? And building it into sort of the company culture and, what you look for in terms of hiring. It's a little bit of a loaded question, and certainly you could probably do an entire session on that. I thought one thing, I have a friend that's looking for a job right now, and she had sent me over a job posting, and I forget which company it was, and I really wish that I could remember at this point. But what I thought was really interesting about the way that they were looking at candidates is they asked candidates to submit their resume without their name, without identifying details on it. Because, a lot of companies, I think, especially when it comes to culture and not just around diversity, say things like, we want to be diverse and we want to, hire people that are like smart, driven, that are all these things. And sometimes it does begin to sound like marketing fluff, right? Because like every company is saying this and saying it's important to them. But what are companies actually doing? How are they building that into their hiring process? And so I thought it was really interesting, this company that I saw recently, when I think about, talking the talk and walking the walk, that they said, in our recruiting process, like this is something that we're going to do because diversity is important to us. And we know that there are, like subtle social cues in terms of people's names, maybe where they live, some of the things in their backgrounds, that they ask people to remove those things from their resume so that those, social biases that exist that people might not actively be thinking about or screening for, that it kind of just takes that off the table. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point, and especially from like unconscious bias training that's that companies have run through, and I've been a part of that here at my company Indigo, and also in other companies too. I've seen that of scrubbing any identifiers, right? To whether we all like it or not, that we all hold biases, right? And it's
and even from my own experience, I think like HubSpot has obviously done a lot in this sort of arena in terms of communicating, diversity being important to them. Also, putting into place, policies and things that I've seen just, as an outsider at this point. But even things like if you look at like their job postings on their site, to encourage more women to apply, they have kind of like I don't know, like a note or like a disclaimer on there where, I think we know as a fact that women are sometimes more hesitant to apply to a job if they don't 100% meet the criteria that's in the job posting. If it's like 10 years of experience with this, 2 years of experience, this type of degree. And if a woman doesn't check all those boxes, she's a little bit less likely to apply to it. And so they have like this kind of disclaimer on their job postings where it's like, we know that sometimes people are discouraged from applying if they don't, meet 100% of these, but, we encourage people to apply even if you're not like the 100% match, and like, tell us why you're a good fit for this. So even things like that I think are kind of these gentle reminders, and it gives you like this great impression of what they look for and what they value and how they think about hiring differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Megan, I have a question for you. What tools, or what is something that you can touch on, is what tools or practices does your team use to keep remote workers engaged and maintain a strong internal culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the same that a lot of, so we have Slack, and that's been, especially because we have developers, I think it's one of those, no one will ever convince the team not to use Slack. So, but I think we've been trying very hard to keep that. We were also remote first, and we actually have, again, a constrained talent market. And so we hire where the talent is. So we have sort of groups of people across the US now and internationally. But I'll say that, again, from our CEO down, sort of making sure that we were all kind of accessible. So we have a video on policy, for example. So any meeting that we're on, all of the leadership team is, at least all of us, is sort of expected and maintain that everybody's video is on. So no matter who walks behind you, like that kind of stuff. And so, and we use that more and more. We had something early on, I'm going to forget the name of it. Anyway, that was like sort of you shared off, like a shared remote office that you could go into and sort of pop in just to have kind of like water cooler talk. We broke the platform basically trying to, get like 100 people on it. And so now it's more Zoom, but we do a lot of, again, I would say that now the people team does a really good job of every week we have some kind of like virtual team event. So last week it was guess who's baby pictures or something like that on, but so there's always something that's going around that helps people keep engaged. And then we also have like more casual stuff. So now there've been a couple people that have taken up like a V-beer, and so like 4:00, and then sometimes 7 or 8 to get the West Coast people in. Somebody will send out a note that just said like, hey, we're all going to jump on anybody who's around. And so we still have that kind of like office culture that going out, but it's remote. Those are some of the things we've done.
Yeah, I think I've been part of a pet challenge bracket, or where people submit pets and you battle with who's the cutest. It's I'm partial to my dog. I take it way too personal when he doesn't win, but it's
completely
okay.
Unbiased.
Absolutely, completely. Yeah, he's a champion in my eyes always. David, a good question for you. Would you hire a chief people officer, and when? And second to that is, what are the strategic impact of such a role like chief people officer?
It's a good question. That definitely strikes me as a much later hire than the stage we are. And it's hard for me to imagine what things would look like at, say, 100 people or 1,000 people. I mean, even at 25 people, I know they're going to be a lot different than they are today. So I guess the best I could say is it's just not yet. And I think the reason I would state that is because we're still small enough that everybody can talk to everybody, and you can kind of have this nice self-reinforcing structure. And to some extent, we do have a person in the company who kind of takes that role on more than everyone else. Checks in with everybody's with their personal health, with how they're enjoying everything, with where they see themselves going. So I do think that they're not titled the chief people officer, but we do have someone who's sort of taken upon themselves to make sure that every person at the company feels like they're being productive and they're moving in the direction they want to. And so to that end, I think that that's been extremely valuable, to have them spending time that way. And so, yeah, we may not have a chief people officer, but I do think that we are intentional about the people in our company.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting question, just like even to add something there, even now that there is this discussion around having a chief people officer, so someone that's really focused on culture team at an executive level. I don't think 5 or 10 years ago that was the conversation that was happening. Same with roles that I've seen, like a chief of staff, that I'm seeing more and more, especially, in the tech and software space. So I do think that there's a lot that's kind of come up where, these culture, focusing on people operations, focusing on talent, as an executive team issue, has been really interesting over the past couple of years.
So how, this is a perfect segue into another question someone asked is, how would you hold middle level managers accountable to sustaining and nurturing culture? So talked about that, being intentional about that, and you kind of, if you could probably take that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's the communication piece, but it has to go both ways, right? It's communicating the company culture, the values, ensuring like that it's happening at the hiring process, but also like when you think about things like reviews or even just kind of less formal feedback that you give employees. And then also when someone, let's say, like is decided, let's say when you part ways with someone and it's kind of over culture fit, well, how is that communicated back, and then how do you implement and make changes to kind of correct things that might have gone wrong. So I think that communication both comes top down but also bottom up, and making sure that it's constant.
I would also say, I mean, that make them understand that it's also their job, that especially because they have much more one-on-one contact than maybe even the executive layer or anything like that. I think people manage and they maintain what they're invested in, and so giving them a voice, having a round table, but so to what Juliet just said is also like having it come up from them what they want the culture to be, and letting them have a say in it, I think is also important.
Yeah. David, in a smaller company, how does each individual hire, change and change the culture, right? How does that look like for you guys as you bring on someone new to a smaller team? Is it more of a culture fit or a culture add scenario?
Yeah, so definitely, I know several of our employees would very strongly assert that it's a culture add scenario. And I think, especially when you're as small as we are, every single person that you bring on, they have their own goals, their own initiatives, and we're a company that's really about empowering the people we employ and the people we bring on. And because we're about empowering people, if someone has something they care about, that's necessarily going to move the direction of the company. There are so few people, and so you have the opportunity to make a big difference. And then we also tell you that we want you to make a big difference. And so necessarily, every single person you bring on has some sort of surprise with them, something that didn't come up at all in the interview process that they end up, helping define the company with. And so I do think that it's very important when you're interviewing to make sure that there's ideological alignment, and that, because there's no way you're going to catch everything that a person is about. And so you just want to make sure that those core values are there, and then just trust that if the core values are there, whatever surprises they have are aligned already. And then that will shape your company. Every person when you're 10, every person shapes the company.
In a huge way, right? Yeah. What about and Megan and Julia? What about as you guys, if partnering with talent, like someone like me, like a recruiter, right? What are the discussions about, like, all right, culture and talent brand, and how are we attracting the right people? What does that relationship look like, or how does that conversation, what does it look like really?
Yeah, you want to start? Or?
Yeah, well, I would say, the past two companies, we haven't had someone that's focused on sort of the talent acquisition side. So I look forward to some of these. But one of the things that even now that we've started doing, as we kind of get to the stage that we're at right now with about 70 employees, we actually went through the exercise of creating a culture video where we wanted to have a way to kind of show people what the culture of Link Squares is like, even before they enter into the interview process and get a sense for us. And so we went through this exercise on the marketing team where, we thought through, what are our company pillars and things like that. We talked with employees about the reasons why they like working at the company, what's important to them, to really solidify down, some of those things that we wanted to communicate to the outside world about what makes our company culture different. And sharing it out with the team, getting feedback along the way. And it was probably, a 6-week process to create this video and to really gather all this information across the organization, to build alignment, to communicate it out. So even something like that was a really valuable experience for not just for this piece of marketing content that we created, but also with everyone in the organization. It was really exciting to kind of premiere this video to the team because so many people contributed to it, and having it be a way for us to kind of communicate, solidify, and like realign even the team.
Yeah, for someone like me, if I was part of that, like, and I'd be recruiting, I'd literally be using that every day, right? Of every candidate I talk to, like, hey, you're asking me what this culture's like. Don't take it from me. I get paid to say this, right? And of course, you can watch this video and hear what everyone else's collective thoughts are and what there is. And it's so much more powerful hearing that of those real life examples for people to see, that it should be taken advantage of when you can. Sorry, Megan, I know you were about to chime in.
Yeah, no, I would say that what has been interesting for us too is that as our clients changed, our talent brand had to change because the types of people that we were hiring changed too. So it was always the goal to get bigger and bigger deals. It's more fun for people, bigger clients, there's less context switching, all of those different kinds of things. But also the difference in serving $1 million customer and $100,000 customer is pretty significant in terms of your experience and the kinds of jobs that you've been at before, but also the types of companies that you're looking for. So we had a lot of discussions around kind of like, okay, if we're recruiting for senior level, CIO, like, or C-suite level connections, they're looking for growth, they're looking for impact, they're looking for, often cause-based, like that kind of thing, as opposed to like how big the growth is going to be. And so we had sort of an interesting juxtaposition, and we left some of the, I would say, the kitschiness of our culture behind, as we had to inevitably establish a more sophisticated talent brand too. But then the question was, how do you stay true to those core values that are us, even if you're wearing a jacket?